The main mission here on the channel is to analyze various fantasy worlds from pop culture, whether that be books, TV shows, or movies, and see if we can unravel the history of a world that never existed. What is realistic and what isn't? Today I'm going to be analyzing the School of the Manticore armor set from The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt to see what about it I like, what about it works, and what I would change. Greetings, adventurers. My name is Kramer, and thank you for joining me for part 2. My bracer is already knocking up against this pouch. We'll get to that in a second. This is part 2 of a series on the School of the Manticore armor, which is one of my favorite armor sets from The Witcher 3, and you can go ahead and check out part 1 right up here if you haven't seen that already. Starting with the boots, Geralt is wearing heeled shoes. Now, in the case of adventuring generally, I tend to wear sort of a faux moccasin. They're very similar in function to the way the medieval shoes would have been made. I just made them slightly differently, but they have a very thin sole. They're almost a barefoot shoe. There's very little support and just enough protection so that you don't get stabbed with a rock while you're walking. So that's what I have the most experience when I'm out adventuring. But in the case of Witchers, having a heeled shoe does make a lot of sense because they're spending a lot of time in the saddle. Heels are very good for controlling stirrups when you're riding. And the rest of the time, while Witchers do spend some time in the wild, and arguably a softer soled shoe might do better if you were tracking something and trying to remain stealthy, Witchers are spending a lot of time on the road and in urban areas. They're not really exploring brand new areas of terrain and having to do maybe what a ranger would be doing. They're more going around to already settled areas in order to protect them from the monsters that arise there. And I can tell you that while I find barefoot shoes to be fairly comfortable when I'm out in the wild, walking with them on pavement or cobblestones is not very comfortable at all. So in this regard, I think that Geralt using heeled boots instead of a softer bottom shoe with no heel makes a lot of sense. When it comes to his pants with that little strip of what appears to be gambeson on the side of his leg, I feel like it would be better than nothing. Again, since I haven't made those for myself, I don't really know how well they would work, but I would imagine it's not as effective as actually having armor on your leg. Moving on up here, I talked about this briefly in the part 1 video. Geralt actually has a knife that is strapped right to his thigh. It's not attached to his belt or anything. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, as you can see here. I didn't want to make a separate scabbard that just strapped to my thigh simply because I already knew it wouldn't work. So this one is attached to my belt. It's much easier to control the weapon. Now, in the lore, the School of the Manticore is one of the less explored schools, but they do come from a desert area. I now happen to live in the desert, and it is much cooler, I mean in terms of temperature, it's much cooler to wear something like this than having the full sleeves or wearing the full gambeson. In the games, the armor set is also supposed to have a slightly less than 20% resistance to piercing damage and a slightly higher, somewhere in the high 20s or low 30s resistance to slashing damage. So when it comes to a softer leather jacket like this, I find that to be reasonable. It's not going to protect you from a full-on thrust to the chest, but a glancing blow to the chest, it might do a little bit to help mitigate that force. And when it comes to slashing, I mean, it's not gonna do anything against bludgeoning damage. When it comes to slashing, it might protect your skin against superficial cuts. I do like the functionality of it. I mean, aside from all of the extra straps and wearing the sword on my back, it is more or less a pretty historically accurate look. So aesthetically, I really like it for that. It's also very functional. I have great mobility with my arms. I would easily be able to fight or go on an adventure in this. It feels very adventure ready. But again, in the context of a Witcher who is faster and stronger, has a healing factor, has potions that accelerate the healing faster, that relies on speed when they are fighting much, much larger creatures, where it's pretty much like you're either wearing plate or it's not going to help you at all, it makes sense to wear something much lighter like this so they can capitalize on their speed and agility. Now, something you will be familiar with if you've watched the channel for a while is that I cannot stand vambraces. I find them to be uncomfortable, annoying to put on, and they're kind of just a trope. They're added throughout Hollywood just because for some reason, some person decided that this is the medieval look. But, and it pains me to say this, in the case of a Witcher, I can think of an argument for why this might be necessary, and that is because Geralt has silver studs on his vambraces. Now, hear me out. I'm not necessarily saying that this would be 100% effective, but this is like my devil's advocate take, is that with vambraces on and with the silver studs, you are less likely to be injured if you are fighting sort of a smaller or a lower IQ style of monster like a ghoul. If you're fighting against a human being that has a weapon, you're likely to get hit in the hands and you really want to be protecting your head. But when you're fighting a smaller creature, maybe something that crawls, think of a dog. right? Think of a dog. In videos you see of people wearing those like big puffy, essentially gambeson suits while they're either training attack dogs or learning how to fight against attack dogs or something. They oftentimes are bit on the arm. And my hypothesis is that if you get a ghoul or a goblinoid or something to bite you on the arm, it's a lot easier to control and maintain that bind so that you know where the threat is going to come from. They're probably going to attack you with their mouth. Now you know where their mouth is. You can control their head, and it's much easier to get a riposte on them rather than it jumping all over the place. To demonstrate, if you were using a shield, one second. If you were using a shield like this, well, dang, now this makes me think having a shield with silver studs on it would also be really effective, but not to use all the time. So if you had a shield like this and you were fighting a predominantly bite attack creature, yes, it's better protection than having a van brace on generally. Like if something comes to bite you, you just block it and there's nothing that the creature can do. But now the creature can just choose to attack you again because you haven't had it bite into anything. If you were using a shield against a sword and the sword bites into the shield and now you have control over the weapon, that's the same idea with this. Because a creature is probably not going to have a jaw big enough to bite over the diameter of the shield. If it does, you have bigger problems and the shield probably isn't going to help you very much. So if the creature were to bite it here, I suppose then you would still have that same control, but that just seems like a lot of setup when you could just wear these. And as we see in a lot of the cutscenes, Geralt actually does use his fists a lot of the time as well. So having studs and being able to control the main source of attack of your opponent, especially for a smaller creature that's not going to be able to bite through this, that's the argument that I can see this working with. Now on to the arms here. How do these work? What are they for? Well, originally when I looked at them, I was thinking to myself, this has to be like a gimmick, right? It has to just be there to like fill the aesthetic space. They can't be doing anything. But then I made them and then I put them on and I found they actually are helpful. You'll survive completely fine without them. They're not at all necessary, but what they do is act as a brace, and you would have shirt stays if you were wearing a suit back in the day as well, and this keeps your sleeves from moving up or moving down your arm. And so what I found was it's not only just slightly more convenient having these, but it also made it way more convenient when I was putting the van braces on, because I didn't have to worry about, am I gonna get this weird extra cuff popping out of the front of the van brace, or is it gonna ride up too much? It just stayed right at that perfect height, and it made putting on the van braces easier, even though I still don't like wearing them. And they're not particularly uncomfortable either. I don't feel like my circulation is getting cut off or anything, and they stay on my arm better than the van braces do. These don't slide and slip around, whereas the van braces constantly want to come off because they're not pointed. That's another thing. This is something I've always said. Every time I've worn these, I'm like, I should just point them to my shirt the way they would actually be worn so they stay at the right height and they don't move around, which the stays would help with, because if these are pointed to the shirt and then the shirt is strapped to your arm so nothing moves around, it's going to be very secure. So at some point I'm going to have to bite the bullet and just punch some holes in these. You may even notice while I've been doing this video that my hand movements are a little weird, and that's partly because the gloves are not the right size to go over the van braces as they're supposed to, so my fingers feel a little bit longer than they usually are, and the van braces are also sliding down my arm because that is what van braces do if they're not pointed to your arm the way they're supposed to be worn. Things like this they're just not historically accurate. So gloves, they're a good idea. Obviously, if you're sword fighting, you're gonna get hit in the hands likely. So some form of gauntlet, some sort of hand protection is more advisable than not having it at all, especially if you're gonna be using your own arm as bait to like get a ghoul to attack you. You definitely want hand protection. The problem is, it's hard to get the dexterity needed to get one of these boys out, take the tiny little cork out, and then drink from it. You'd probably just throw it away, but Geralt does restow his empty ones. And so doing that quickly, maybe it's something you could train to do faster. I can't even do it right now. That being said, gloves are a good idea. If you really need to, you can just like take it off, I suppose. And this thing right here, I love it. I'm gonna use it far more often, I think. Now, having a pouch on your chest here. Originally, when I designed my right baldric, I actually it's got a strap right here. I put this pouch on the strap and worn it mirrored on the opposite side of my body, because that's what Geralt does in a lot of his kits. He has a pouch here. And I stopped doing that because I found it very annoying. My arm, even though this is a small pouch, it's probably only 1 inch in thickness. I'm constantly catching it with my arm. I'll start to get a bruise right here eventually if I wear this too much. It gets caught on my van braces. It's not a very convenient location to keep things because I'm having to like crane my arm in here. I'm over exaggerating. It's not a huge deal, but it's not the optimal spot, in my opinion, for a pouch to be. It's not very stable. If you put it under your arm, it gets caught when you're walking. If you put it out here, it gets in the way while you're trying to do two-handed sword movements. This is just not the optimal spot. And it's confusing to me because in this kit, Geralt has pretty much nothing on his waist belt. It almost begs the question why he's even wearing one at all, because he has one, and his knife, as we discussed, is strapped to his thigh. It's not attached to his waist belt. The only thing on Geralt's waist belt in the Manticore kit is actually a hook that he has here on his left side so he can like stick the head of his prey on it when he's done killing it, I guess. Just carry that. Like, why get the blood on your thigh if you don't have to? So there's so much real estate here on the waist that is not being used. I will not be wearing this here in the future. I will be wearing it here on the waist because the waist is just a more convenient place to put things. It's easy to access and it also distributes weight better rather than having stuff either be front heavy or back heavy. In its defense though, this sort of 2-strap system, it does make more sense to me than having just the 1 strap unless it's super heavy duty and like really thick and maintains its structure. If you were gonna have a sword or 2 swords like a Witcher would on your back, caveat, in the games, Geralt wears both swords for convenience. In the books, Geralt keeps one of his swords on his horse and he only carries one at a time, which makes a lot more sense to me realistically, but in a game, it's like a quality of life thing. So if you were going to be wearing something on straps and heavy stuff was going to go on your back and you were going to front load yourself with pouches too, to me it actually does make sense to have the double straps here because then you have a lot of weight on one strap and weight on a different strap rather than having one strap weighed down with everything all going across one shoulder. It helps distribute things. I don't have as much back pain as wearing everything on the one shoulder, whereas having 2, it just feels more comfortable. Having the shorter doublet here also just makes me feel a little bit more capable, a little bit more athletic. I've had my own version of the Ursine armor with the larger chest plate and then having a long gambeson, and while it's one of my favorites because it looks so cool, it does make actually moving around and doing things a lot more difficult. So I like having this more streamlined look specifically for doing things. So the School of the Manticore kit it's well proportioned. The weight is distributed evenly. I think it's a very adventure ready kit. It's very, very practical aside from the few small adjustments I would make. There's a lot of wasted real estate space here where you could have extra pouches and stuff to hold if you're a Witcher, your bombs or something like that. This pouch needs to go here. It makes a lot more sense to me. The knife needs to be attached to the waist. It makes a lot more sense to me. But aside from that, everything else it works and it looks good. So thank you for joining me as we analyze this armor set from The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I will see you very soon, and in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures.